The coach looked at 23-year-old Simone Bellard like she was something he'd accidentally tracked in on the bottom of his shoe. "You swim like you belong in a kiddie pool," he said. Not quietly. Not as a joke. Right there on the pool deck, in front of the entire National Development Squad, with the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and the smell of chlorine so thick you could taste it. "Go home, Bellard. Your mother needs someone to hold her hand at the grocery store more than this team needs you in the water." Laughter. Some of it nervous. Some of it not. Simone stood there dripping, her goggles pushed up on her forehead, water running off her chin and onto the tile. She didn't say anything. She just looked at head coach Richard Ashby and nodded, very slowly, like she was filing something away. That was March. By the following August, Simone Bellard would be standing on the Olympic podium in Paris. With a gold medal around her neck, water still in her ears from the race, her mother crying so hard in the stands that a stranger had to put an arm around her. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Simone grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in a house that had one bathroom for 5 people and a backyard that flooded every time it rained hard enough. Her mother, Claudette Bellard, worked the overnight shift at a hospital laundry facility for 11 years. She came home every morning smelling like industrial detergent, ate a bowl of cereal standing over the kitchen sink, and was asleep by 7 a.m. before Simone and her 2 younger brothers had to leave for school. There was no money for swim lessons. There was barely money for the kind of groceries that didn't come in a can. What there was a community center pool 3 blocks away that offered free Saturday morning sessions for kids under 14, and a volunteer coach named Mr. Hargrove who had a bad knee and a louder voice than anyone Simone had ever met. She was 9 years old the first time she dove into that pool. She came up sputtering and laughing at the same time. Mr. Hargrove watched her from the side of the pool and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Do that again." Exactly like that. So she did. By the time she was 12, she was out swimming every kid in that Saturday program. By 14, she qualified for the state junior championships. By 16, she was being quietly mentioned in conversations about potential, the kind of conversations that happen in hallways between adults who don't realize a teenager can hear them through a door. The problem was always money. Travel fees, for meets, new suits, entry fees, hotels, equipment. The whole apparatus of competitive swimming that nobody talks about when they talk about discovering talent. The part where talent alone is never enough, where you also have to afford to show up. Claudette Bellard worked extra shifts. She sold her grandmother's jewelry. She sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, more times than Simone ever knew about, running numbers that never quite added up, finding ways to make them add up anyway. Simone knew enough to understand what her mother was doing. She understood in the way that children of sacrifice always understand. Not through words, but through the specific texture of silence that settles over a house when money is tight and love is the only thing that isn't. She swam like every lap was something she owed. When Simone was 19, she earned a partial athletic scholarship to a university in North Carolina. It covered tuition but not housing, not books, not the specialized coaching she would need if she was serious. And she was serious. She worked part-time at a coffee shop 4 mornings a week, woke up at 4:30 to get her training in before her shift, went to class, went back to the pool, went to work, studied until midnight. For 2 years, she ran on caffeine and something that wasn't quite stubbornness but was adjacent to it. She sent money home when she had it. When she didn't have it, she sent voice messages instead, long ones, telling her mother about the races she'd won, the time she'd clocked, the things she was learning. Claudette listened to every single one of them twice. At 21, Simone qualified for the U.S. national trials. She finished 4th in the 200-meter freestyle. 4th. Not on the team, but close enough that people started paying attention in a different way. That was when Richard Ashby entered the picture. Coach Ashby had a wall in his office covered in photographs, Olympic athletes he had coached. National champions, world record holders. He had a reputation, legitimate, real, earned over decades, for turning promising swimmers into elite ones. He also had a reputation, quieter but no less real, for deciding very quickly who was worth his time and who wasn't, and for not being particularly gracious about the ones he decided weren't. Simone was accepted into his national development program on the strength of her trials performance. She drove 14 hours from North Carolina to the training facility in Colorado Springs with everything she owned in the back of a 2009 Honda Civic that had no functioning air conditioning. She arrived on a Tuesday. By Friday, she already knew something was wrong. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of small things. The way small things always accumulate until they're not small anymore. It was the way Ashby's eyes moved past her, in group briefings, like she was scenery. It was the way he corrected her technique in a tone he didn't use with the other swimmers, not instructive, not coaching, but something closer to contempt. It was the comment he made in front of the whole group during her first timed trial, when she finished 0.2 of a second slower than her personal best, because she was adjusting to the altitude, and said so. Altitude, he repeated, looking around at the other swimmers, like he was letting them in on a joke. Right. Simone said nothing. She had learned, over years of being underestimated, that silence was sometimes the most powerful thing she had. She had learned to take the anger and compress it into something dense and fuel-efficient. She put it where her competitors couldn't see it. She put it in her legs on the turns. She put it in her arms on the final 50 meters. She took everything that was meant to make her smaller, and she used it to get faster. But Ashby had a way of finding the seams in a person. In her third week at the facility, her mother called. Claudette's voice was different, thinner, slower. She had been having some pain in her side. She was going to see a doctor. It was probably nothing. Don't worry about it. Simone hung up the phone and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. The next morning she had a time trial. She was off, not catastrophically. Half a second, maybe a little more. But off. She knew it before she'd even touched the wall. Ashby knew it too. He walked over while she was pulling off her cap, and he looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity, and wasn't quite satisfaction but lived somewhere in between. "What's happening at home?" he said. She looked at him. "Nothing. Because it looks like you've got one foot here and one foot somewhere else." He paused. "This program is for athletes who are here. All the way here. Not for people carrying baggage." He picked up his clipboard. "You've got 2 weeks before the selection meet. I'm not going to tell you how to spend that time. But I'll tell you this, if you swim Friday the way you swam today, you won't make the team. And that'll be it. That will be the end of this for you." He looked at her one more time. Maybe that's what makes sense. He walked away. Simone stood there with her swim cap in her hands and the water cooling on her skin. Here is what she did not do. She did not cry. She did not call her mother back. She did not go to any of the other coaches, or the program administrators, or anyone else. Here is what she did. She went back to her room, sat down on the floor with her back against the bed, and stayed there for exactly 20 minutes. She let herself feel all of it. The anger, the fear about her mother, the humiliation, the exhaustion, the specific grief of being seen as less than you are by someone who has the power to determine your future. She felt every single bit of it. And then she stood up. She pulled out the training plan she'd written for herself back in North Carolina, the one she'd built herself from research and her own years of knowing her body. She looked at it for a long time. Then she trained. Not just hard. She had always trained hard. She trained with a precision she had never quite allowed herself before, the kind that comes when you stop trying to prove something to someone else and start doing it entirely for yourself. There is a difference between those two things, and most people never find it. And the people who do find it are terrifying. She called her mother every night. Claudette's test results came back. There was something that needed attention. A mass, not yet defined, requiring more imaging. The doctors were being careful. Claudette was being practical. which was the only way she knew how to be. "I need you to focus on your race," Claudette told her. "Mom." Simone Marie Bellard. Her mother's voice was firm in the way it got when something had been decided. "I didn't work 11 years of overnight shifts so you could use me as an excuse to hold yourself back. You hear me? You get in that water and you swim. That's what you do. Let me handle this end." Simone held the phone against her ear long after the call ended. The selection meet was held on a Friday evening in late March. The facility was not packed. These were development trials, not a public spectacle. But there were enough coaches, officials, and athletes present that the pressure was real and specific. This was the kind of room where futures were decided by hundredths of a second, where the difference between being on the plane to Paris and watching it on television was a fraction of time too small to perceive with the human eye. Simone stood behind the block in lane 4. Coach Ashby was standing near the timing table. He didn't look at her. She looked at the water. The water didn't care who she was. The water didn't know about her mother, or the hospital, or the overnight shifts, or Richard Ashby's opinion of her. The water was just water, 183 meters of it, waiting. She thought about Claudette at the kitchen sink, eating cereal standing up so she could get to sleep faster, selling her grandmother's jewelry without saying a word about it, listening to voice messages twice. The starting signal sounded. Simone Bellard hit the water. What happened in the next minute and 53 seconds is the kind of thing that doesn't translate well into words, which is maybe why people spend so much energy trying to find the right ones. There is something that happens in a race, when everything you have ever practiced, every sacrifice you have ever made, every moment of doubt you have ever swallowed and converted into something useful. When all of that arrives at once, when the body stops being something you have to push and becomes something that just goes. When the turns are perfect, not because you thought about them, but because you've done them 10,000 times and thought about them, is no longer the right description. She touched the wall. She looked up at the board. 1 minute, 53.4 seconds. It was a personal best, by more than a second. It was fast enough to qualify for Olympic selection. It was, as it turned out, the fastest women's 200-meter freestyle time recorded by an American swimmer that entire season. The pool deck was quiet for a moment. Then it wasn't. Simone pulled herself out of the water and stood up. She looked at the board for a long time. She wasn't smiling yet. She was doing the thing she always did first, the private thing. Taking inventory, feeling the realness of it, making sure it was real before she let herself respond to it. It was real. She smiled then, just to herself, just for a second, before everything got loud. She found her phone in her bag. She called her mother. "Mom." Claudette answered on the second ring, voice alert the way it gets when you've been waiting. "Tell me." "I made the team." The sound that came through the phone then, that is something that also doesn't translate into words. Some things are not for language. Some things are just for the people who are in them. Simone Bellard represented the United States in the women's 200-meter freestyle at the Summer Olympics in Paris, France. She was the only member of her household who had ever owned a passport. Claudette's medical situation, in the months between the selection meet and the games, resolved more favorably than the initial imaging had suggested. She was going to be fine. She was going to be in the stands. The morning of the final, Simone woke up at 5 a.m. in the Olympic Village and lay on her back, staring at the ceiling for a while. She was not nervous in the way people expect elite athletes to be nervous. She was something more focused than that. She was collected in the way of someone who has already done the hard part, who has already done it 10,000 times in the dark, without an audience, without a scoreboard, without anyone watching. The race itself lasted 1 minute, 52.8 seconds. Personal best. Olympic record. Gold. When she touched the wall and the numbers appeared on the board, Simone did not immediately celebrate. She hung on the lane rope for a second. Breathing. Just breathing. Then she looked up, and the noise hit her like something physical, and she found the stands with her eyes, section by section, scanning, until she found her mother. Claudette Ballard was on her feet. She had both hands over her mouth. The woman sitting next to her. A stranger. Someone from a completely different country who had come to watch completely different athlete. Had her arm around Claudette's shoulders, and Claudette didn't even seem to notice. She was looking at Simone. Just looking at her. Simone put her hand on her heart. Claudette put her hand on hers. There is a photograph from the medal ceremony that went around the internet later that week. It shows Simone on the podium, head bowed as the medal is placed around her neck. And in the background, slightly out of focus, you can see the stands. And if you know where to look, you can see a woman in a pale blue shirt, with her hands clasped together and her eyes closed, like she's praying, or maybe just receiving something she's been waiting a very long time for. Claudette Ballard did not work the overnight shift for 11 years. Thinking about Olympic gold medals, she worked at thinking about her daughter's future in the specific, unglamorous way that parents think about their children's futures. Not about glory, but about stability, about options, about a life with more choices than her own. The gold medal was a surprise. The fact of her daughter's strength was not. After the ceremony, Simone found her mother in the family area, and they hugged for a long time without saying anything. When they finally separated, Claudette looked at her daughter's face for a moment, then looked at the medal, then looked back at her daughter. "You need to eat something," she said. "You look thin." Simone laughed until she had to sit down. Coach Richard Ashby was not present at the Olympic Games. He had stepped down from the National Development Program in June, citing personal reasons. Whether those reasons had anything to do with the fact that the swimmer he'd dismissed on a pool deck in Colorado Springs had gone on to break his most decorated athlete's national record is something he has not publicly addressed. Probably he never will. Some people spend their whole lives unable to say the thing that would most benefit them to say. That's not Simone's story, though. His choices are his own to carry. What belongs to Simone is this: a gold medal, a personal record. A mother in the stands with her hands over her mouth. The memory of a pool deck in March and a comment that was meant to diminish her, and instead became the cleanest source of fuel she'd ever found. And the drive back from Colorado Springs, 14 hours, no air conditioning. Everything she owned in the back seat, which, it turned out, was enough. It was always enough. She just had to keep moving until the rest of the world caught up to what she already knew about herself. She called Mr. Hargrove from the airport in Paris. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "you remember that first Saturday? When you told me to do it again exactly like that." A pause, then his big loud voice, a little rougher now than it used to be. "I remember. I did it again," she said. "Exactly like that.